It's amazing how my feelings on hero pools have changed in the last year. When they first came out, I was very excited, but then I quickly realized that the system in place during the 2020 season was flawed. What originally seemed like a great idea that could help keep the meta fresh became a nightmare seemingly overnight. It was clear how much stress it was putting on both the players and the coaches alike. It was too much. Even changing the rotation on a bi-weekly basis instead of every week was a bit overwhelming. It didn't help that many of the same heroes got banned on multiple occasions. It was clear that some changes needed to be made in Season 4 to make a difference, and so far, to give my way too early judgment, the league hit the bullseye. Having hero pools over a 4-week span and only doing them for half of the tournaments might be the perfect balance we were looking for. It accomplishes a few things in my opinion. For starters, teams are going to feel at least a little bit less stressed out than they did during the old system days. It still sucks to have the meta potentially change, but you have more weeks to perfect your craft now. You get 4 games, plus potential tournament matches if you're a top squad from the qualifiers. Any team in the running realistically gets 4 weeks to practice. So yeah, there might be some rough waves to ride out early on. We saw it happen to the Outlaws, Justice, and Fusion just to name a few examples. But as time goes on, they can show improvement. It provides a unique challenge for the teams you'd expect to be on top. Some fans might find it annoying, especially if their team was doing well pre-hero pools. And that's fair. It could ultimately come back to rob you of making the playoffs or one of the tournaments, or maybe from getting that perfect seeding you were looking for, or just the general enjoyment that comes with watching your team win. If you feel that way, I'm not going to hold it against you, but here's how I see it. If your team is having a hard time adapting to the environment around them, they might not be ready for potential title aspirations. A major key to being a championship level squad is showcasing versatility. Metas change. It happens. If you can't beat somebody who was previously bottom of the barrel, you aren't where you need to be. If you aren't prepared for anything and everything, you could find yourself going home way earlier than anticipated. Look at Paris from last year, for example. The meta drastically changed around playoff time, and they found themselves getting eliminated after only 2 games. Looking at it from a regular season point of view, you can only hope your team gains a valuable experience from these types of losses. It's better to have these struggles now rather than later when the stakes are at their highest. On the other side of it, some of the teams who are not as strong kind of get a clean slate in a sense. It might only be a temporary fix for some teams, but others might jumpstart a turnaround from something like this. It could be the difference between qualifying for the playoffs and having to watch them from home. They might be a massive difference maker for teams like the Spark, Reign, Uprising, and alexyOWL, just to name a few. Those good, but not great teams who previously couldn't defeat any of the top dogs now suddenly have what it takes. As a general fan of the league who covers this on a week-to-week basis, it's very entertaining. I mean, just in week 1 alone of the June Joust qualifiers, that is, we saw the final 3 undefeated teams take an L. That is wild. They were all upsets as well. It's not like all of them were taking on superior opponents. Each and every one of them had a winnable matchup, so it's kind of just on them. They didn't come to play. Along with their errors, though, their opponents who you'd expect to be weaker showed great improvements. It's like I said, a meta change kind of offers a new perspective of sorts for some of these teams. It lets them keep their heads up after going down early. You don't really have to worry about bashing your head into the metaphoric wall over and over again due to unfavorable metas which you've been practicing for months now. You can kind of just throw those frustrations out the window because the situation has changed. All it takes is a small wave of momentum in scrims or one big upset, and suddenly you might be ready to turn the corner. It puts the competitive nature of the league in such a beautiful place. Is it really enjoyable when everything feels predictable all the time? No, of course not. It's what makes any sport at the professional level so enjoyable. The upsets that you don't see coming at all cause all sorts of different emotions to go off in your head. I, for one, have loved every single bit of it. So what if I get some silly and meaningless predictions wrong? The entertainment we're getting in return is well worth it. I will gladly take getting boomed if it means we get parity in the league. I mean, take a look at those APAC standings. The top 3 teams are all 4-2, and depending on how next week goes, that means the Dynasty could have the best record in the region. And look below them for crying out loud. If you're going off their record, then the Spark are only 1 game behind those top 3 teams in the standings. There is not a lot of separation going on right now, and with one of their next matches being against the Valiant, they likely stay within striking distance of those teams. It's not a one-sided race so far. Things could easily change in the future, don't get me wrong, but being nearly halfway through the season with all these teams being so close to one another is incredible. But if I'm being honest, the random upsets are good enough on their own for me. The turn of events during week 1 of the June Joust was ludicrous. I mean, come on. The NYXL beating the Fusion was pretty crazy. Then, just one freaking day later, they somehow lose to the Charge because they weren't prepared for their unique comms. How does something like that even happen? How do you go from beating the top team in the region record-wise to losing to a one-win team? Or what about the Spark sweeping the Dragons, or Paris dismantling the Justice? Upsets were everywhere, and then you have teams like Boston who sweep both of their opponents who are technically better than them in the previous stage, and now because of it, Boston appear to be having a resurgence of some sort. Only 2 of the 14 franchises who played during Week 6 went 2-0. You literally cannot make this stuff up. It's totally unpredictable. If I didn't see it with my own eyes, I would have never believed it. How the heck do we go from a fairly predictable qualifier with the only real major surprise probably being the Fuel to any team having a chance to beat anybody? Hero pools are wild. I don't know if I'm overreacting. Maybe this is only a temporary thing. Perhaps everything returns to normal by as soon as next week, so then the teams who were supposed to win last week start dominating again. But could you imagine if Hero Pools were to remain this crazy in the coming weeks, as well as in the Countdown Cup when Hero Pools are also implemented? That would be sick. Even if the upsets from Hero Pools were to suddenly stop though, that does not change the fact that the last week was insanely entertaining. There is so much potential for a few teams to sneak into a tournament because of this type of system. Could you imagine if like the Uprising or the Spark maybe made it through like the qualifiers and the knockouts somehow? That would be an incredible storyline, and it would really freshen things up to have a few different teams represent each region. As of right now, this year doesn't feel like previous years where we're like, yeah, it's going to be the Shock, the Dragons, the Titans, the NYXL, etc., etc. None of that is a given. It really will depend on how some of these teams can adjust to Hero Pools. Some teams are not meta-proof, and that gets me into another thing that I kind of like about Hero Pools. It's a problem for the teams with high ambitions, right? It's a great challenge for them. It is every team's responsibility to have the flexibility needed to thrive in this league. The good teams are going to find a way to adjust. This is a good way to single out the good ones from the bad ones. It's what the Shock have done basically the last 2 years. If you want a more recent example though, then look at the Outlaws. They suffered a tough loss to the Reign last week, but then they made the necessary adjustments and they came back strong against Florida. They realized that they needed to utilize Orisa more, and look how well it worked out for them. If a top team works at it and they learn from their mistakes, they should figure it out over time, and I love that. Like I said before, if your team can't handle a meta shift, then they likely are not ready for prime time. It can be frustrating and annoying to see your team's luck turn for the worst while other teams go on a hot streak, but at the end of the day, that's on your team. There are professionals who need to step up when the situation changes. If you're relying on your team to get the right meta to go far, then that's no good. Don't depend on RNG. Be consistent. That increases your odds greatly. That is what has worked for the last 2 winners of the championship, aka the Shock. What happened with London back in Season 1, that's pretty lucky in my opinion, and not something you want to depend on. It'll be interesting to see how a team like the Fusion or Justice do moving forward. It'll be a good indicator on whether they're contenders or pretenders in my opinion. Yeah, we can say in theory that everything will be fine by the time playoffs roll around. There won't be any hero pools to worry about. But what happens if the meta changes? The beginning of September is a long way off. Future patches could change things a lot. I mean, big time. I'm excited to see what the struggling top teams come up with. It's yet another reason why I love these hero pools. These potentially over-the-top storylines, which could get blown way out of proportion, are great. I like the vibe to them. I enjoy being able to think hard about teams in a weird situation while watching them closely. It's something that helps the season be more enjoyable in my opinion. These storylines are great for discussions, both in video format like this, and as a simple conversation to have with some friends. Additional talking points are what makes the sports media world turn. But there's one other thing I absolutely adore about hero pools, besides the storylines and worrying about teams either on the decline or on the rise. And that is the various philosophies we have seen on the meta. A lot of teams seem to play what you'd consider the standard, like with Winston, Diva, Echo, or some sort of double shield comp, but a lot of teams went above and beyond that. It's partly thanks to the game being in a pretty good state, but so many teams did little things differently. They all tried to play up to their own strengths. The Spark, for example, really liked having Architect on Genji and Reaper. I can't speak for Reaper, but they surely did play the most Genji out of any team. And it seemed to work out for them. Architect, he seemed pretty comfortable out there. Probably the most comfortable I've seen him while wearing a Spark uniform. Then you have their rivals in the Charge, who really took a liking to the Doomfist and Zarya comms. Nobody really else tried to run that stuff. It was their own unique style. They played up to their strengths rather than worrying about what anybody else was trying. It reminds me of the Fuel and what they were doing just a couple of weeks ago. And I mean, hey, it seems to be working so far. They seriously threw the NYXL off guard and took a map off the Spark. Even the Reign were doing something a little bit different than everybody else. A majority of teams who ran the Orisa usually paired her up with the Sigma, but not the Reign. They were more interested in running the D.Va, and it worked to perfection. They were truly clicking out there. I would argue they were playing on par with their Rush comms. Gator's best main tank hero is arguably his Orisa right now, so he's kind of in his wheelhouse, and I kind of felt like Kai and Pelican complemented each other very nicely. Kai on the Ashe and Pelican on the Echo proved to be a lethal combination where they essentially just took turns making big plays. And what about Paris? They got pretty creative as well, especially with the tank position. They were one of the few teams to play Roadhog, and don't even get me started on their decision to play Dan on Zarya. Paris seemed like they were having fun out there, which is a pretty big change in emotions compared to just a couple of weeks ago when it took a meeting with the Titans just to get a win. It's entertaining for a general fan of the league, and it's good for Paris fans at the same time. Thinking about it more generally, a lot of teams were willing to give Reaper a try this weekend, and we even saw a fair amount of McCree and Lucio still despite the Reinhardt bans going into effect. It was pretty cool, and I mean, for crying out loud, we got Soldier 76. With no Tracer in the mix, he was a viable replacement to pump out that consistent damage that is missing from Tracer. And I'm all for it. I mean, come on. Who doesn't want to see teams utilize the legs? When is the last time he was viable for more than a week at this level? Think about how long it has been. We got him, what, for like a week in Season 3? Sure, but then he was gone. There's a legit possibility he continues to see playtime on control maps these next few weeks. The last time 76 was seriously played by a fair amount of teams with the possibility of seeing him on a week-to-week basis was probably like Stage 2 of 2018, I want to say. I could be wrong there, but I think you get what I'm trying to say. It's been a few years at this point, and there's so many other examples I can think of when it comes to certain heroes being played, what the meta looks like in general, certain individuals thriving from these changes, and teams and their unique approaches to the meta, but I think you get the point by now. To conclude my thoughts, hero pools make the league more entertaining, unpredictable, and competitive, and I think the current system they have in place is a few steps above what they were trying to do in Season 3. I am very satisfied, and we're only 1 week into the June Joust. Who knows what types of wild events could transpire next? There's question marks about so many different teams who either suffered or thrived during the first week of qualifiers. Not to mention that we still have 3 winless teams as we look into the future. Could one of them pull off some magic by the end of qualifiers? That would kind of be the cherry on top of this thing. I'm hyped and I feel extra hungry for more action, and I'm assuming some of you watching this video kind of feel the same way. If you don't though, that's totally fine, and I would actually love to hear why you aren't enjoying the hero pools if you'd be willing to share your opinion with me. No matter what side you're on though, I think we can all agree that this past weekend sparked a lot of meaningful discussions, whether they're positive or negative ones, that will surely continue in the coming weeks. And that pretty much wraps up my initial thoughts after seeing this year's version of the hero pools and why I think they are amazing. If you enjoyed this video, I would appreciate it if you could give it a like and subscribe if you want to see more discussions out of me in the future. And as always, thank you all so much for watching. I really do appreciate your support, and until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.